Hi, Kara from Health, Home, and Happiness here. Today we're going to talk about sensory issues. This is something that's becoming way more common with our children, and I will go in another video, I will go into why I believe it's becoming more common. But for right now, we're just going to talk about sensory issues and the meltdowns that they cause, and some quick things that you can do to help balance your children out. If you're finding that your children are melting down or seem to be more stressed out than the typical child or what's developmentally appropriate for their age, sensory issues most likely have some, at least a little, or sometimes a lot to do with it. So first, what is our sensory system? Our sensory system is feeling our feet on the ground, it's hearing the hum of the refrigerator right now, it's smelling the different smells that are in my kitchen as I talk to you, and it's seeing the different lights come in from the windows. And all of that, I have a typical sensory system. If you don't have a typical sensory system, you might classify yourself as a highly sensitive adult. And this is kind of the continuation of children that have sensory issues. Adults also have sensory issues. They're becoming much more common in our children. So there's a lot of kind of normal sensory parents that are having children with sensory issues. And so this video is to bring some more understanding. So like I said, there's auditory, which is sound, there's sight, which is like the lights and the visual input, and then there's feet on the floor. That's tactile input, which you might not notice. Like you might just be standing in one spot and you're not thinking about your feet. You're thinking about what you're reading, you're thinking about what you're seeing, you're thinking about what you're going to say at your meeting that's coming up. So first we're going to talk about tactile input, and this is probably the most common sensory issue that people know about. You always know this one child that won't walk on the grass in their bare feet. They don't like the touch of water. They want all of their food to be pureed. They like stroking soft blankets. They need to have clothes that are not too tight. This is all tactile input. And on the other end of the spectrum, and this is what people often forget, is there is a flip side to that coin. So for every child that is too sensitive to sensory input, there is one child that isn't getting the sensory input they need. This is something that you don't realize is going on, but all of the input in our world, our biology has developed so that it's kind of regulating to our body. So if we were in like a weightless chamber, we wouldn't be getting the sensory input that we need either. So for the other children that don't recognize as much sensory input, they're not getting regulated by having just the normal everyday, they're not getting regulated and calmed down. This is what happens is if we're getting too much and we're not getting enough, our body is kind of on high alert, just like we need to go get this input. It's like nourishment for our sensory system. So if on the other end of the spectrum, if a child, and so I'm saying spectrum, and I'm not talking about the autism spectrum at this point. There's many children that do not have autism but do have sensory integration dysfunction or sensory issues. And sensory issues also are extremely common with children with autism, but it doesn't mean that you need to have an autism diagnosis, and it does not mean that every child that has sensory issues has autism. But anyways, back to our tactile input. So on the other side of the coin is the child that isn't getting the input they need from just walking around, doing everyday activities, picking up their spoons, picking up their toys, playing with toys. You might see these children running into walls. They seem to play too rough. And this is just, these kids are too rough. They're stomping, they're bashing into walls. They love going high on the swings. They love all of that stuff. That child needs more tactile input. So now we've talked about tactile for a little bit. In another video, we will go more in depth into each of these categories. But right now, we're just going to do a quick overview so you have an idea of our sensory system and where your child might fall on needing less or more of any particular sensory. Next, we're going to talk about visual sensory input. So visual sensory input, as we said before, is from the lights coming in, it's from the windows coming in, it's from even patterns on the walls, colors on the walls. Children that are too sensitive to visual, and I have one of those, might avert their eyes and hate TV. It's just too much input, too much visual input for these children to handle. Children that prefer to avoid visual input can benefit from wearing sunglasses or having a very calm, like beige walls in their room with very minimal decorations. These children are really bothered by clutter. And then on the other side of the coin is children who are visual seeking. And these kids might love strobe lights. They love playing with flashlights. They love bright, bold colors. Like especially young toddlers will love like the big black and white images of checkerboards or things like that. That is just fascinating for these kids. Glitter, bright colors, all of that. These children are not getting their normal visual input that they need to calm their sensory system. These children are not getting the normal visual input that they need to calm their sensory system, so they are looking for other sources of it. Then finally we have auditory, and this is probably the most well-known. Besides tactile, the child that won't touch grass with their bare feet, that's well-known. Auditory is the next one, and these children are bothered by the hum of the refrigerators. Of course they can't concentrate on their schoolwork. Of course they're going to be on edge. And this is true with any of the sensory issues. These children are on edge. If they're either getting too much input or they're not getting enough input, then these kids are going to be like trying to combat either of those needs. And so they're not going to be able to, these children are trying to fulfill those needs, so they are just kind of preoccupied with either making it stop or trying to get more in. We can help them as parents by either minimizing as much of the stuff that they are averse to as we can, or providing some extra, and we'll go into future videos with how we can provide that. So the last one that we're going to talk about is auditory, and this is one of the more well-known auditory avoidant children. You'll see them with the headphones on, like just noise canceling headphones, and that can help them. So they are hearing the hum of the fridge, and where we can tune that out and continue with our conversation, continue reading our book, continue with what we're working on. To them, it sounds like a freight train is running through the kitchen. And so of course, if a freight train or the sound of a freight train was running through my kitchen, I could not concentrate, I'd be on edge. It's just too much stuff for them to process. And so that's where the children that are trying to avoid auditory stimulation, auditory sensations, are children where it sounds more than it does to us. And on the other end of the spectrum, here's the other side of the coin, is children that crave that, and they might have a voice that's too loud. They might love banging stuff together. We might need to invest in headphones, noise canceling headphones, when we have these children. They just crave loud music, they crave loudness, and it's because they're just not registering they're just not registering that auditory sensation that we do. And so of course, with the children that are craving, if they are talking too loud, if they seem to want everything loud, we do want to check their hearing first. But if their hearing is fine, it might be a sensory issue. In future videos, we are going to go into what to do to help these kids. For each one, auditory seeking, auditory avoiding, tactile seeking, tactile avoiding, visual seeking, and visual avoiding. But for now, I just wanted to bring awareness that if your child's prone to meltdowns, it might be a sensory issue. Thanks for joining me, and come back soon. I hope you found that helpful. I love sharing tips with you, so if you could comment below if you have any questions. I try to reply to all of my comments. And if you could subscribe by clicking over there, I always love to bring you new content. So thanks, and bye for now.